Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. It is July 1st, 2019, on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Back on this date in 1988, the memorial behind me was first dedicated. It is a painting that commemorates the battle in John Kuhn's Brickyard. The painting was conceived by artist Mark Dunkelman, who is the regimental historian for the 154th New York. And the 154th New York sort of held the center here at the Brickyard during a fight that really kind of allowed the 11th Corps to reform and rally on Cemetery Hill after its routing out on the plains north of town. The brigade had been held in reserve on Cemetery Hill, and then suddenly Charles Coster got the call to come forward and help support the 11th Corps, which had met grief out on the plains. And as the 11th Corps, particularly Barlow's division, was falling back, Costner's men were sent forward to help cover that retreat. He's going to place 3 of his regiments here in the Brickyard, the 154th, as I said, holding the center. To their right, the 134th New York. To their right, the 27th Pennsylvania. And they're going to put up a pretty stout resistance, but they're outnumbered almost 3-1 as the Confederate brigades of Hayes and Avery come forward. And they're going to sort of encircle the Federals in essentially what's a big pincer movement. The 154th in the center holds firm. Basically, the Confederates are going to come right up over a wooden fence that the Federals are using as their sort of only bit of cover. And as they do so, one of those New Yorkers said they held on with all the desperation of a forlorn hope. So they're really kind of slugging it out there. Over on the left, the Pennsylvanians get the order to withdraw. But before the messenger can bring the message to the 2 New York regiments, he is killed. And so they don't get the order. So as they're trying to hang on, the Pennsylvanians get up and said one person, they fly off like a flock of geese, or a flock of birds. And as they do so, things then really start to fall apart here. The Brickyard and the 2 New York regiments have to pull back as well. They are able to get up back to Cemetery Hill to their former positions, where they're able to rally around other elements of the 11th Corps that are also rallying there. General Oliver Otis Howard had looked at that as a good defensive fallback position, starts to rally his men, and they're able to then start to reform a new line. Coster's division here, or excuse me, Coster's brigade is really going to take some heavy losses. Their stand really does a lot to help the Federal line reform, but at tremendous cost. They're going to have about 500 casualties, including about 300 captured. Of those captured, 170 plus are from the 154th. I always like to tell about the 154th. I seem to be giving a little bit of emphasis here because they come from my home area back in New York, Cattaraugus and Chautauqua counties up in New York. So I like to give a shout out to the hometown guys. But their story here is really important because in the midst of what becomes a really awful afternoon for the Federal Army, their fight here in the Brickyard does buy the time necessary for the Federals to then begin to rebuild a position. And of course, that new position up along Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, is going to be the key to the battle on July 2nd. So a key element here that's often overlooked. It's as you look here, I'm the only one out here this morning. This is a pretty overlooked part of the battlefield. The memorial itself has been restored a couple times. Most recently, there's been a plexiglass screen put over it to help protect it from the weather and keep the painting up there. What I really find cool about the painting in particular is that Dunkelman, over the course of his years of research, has collected pictures of veterans from the 154th, and so many of those veterans are actually painted into the mural. You can, if you know any of the folks from the regiment, you can pick them out by face and by name. Of course, the most famous person from the regiment, Amos Humiston, whose dead body was found just a couple blocks from here in front of what is now the firehouse. Humiston was unidentified for months and months, but he had a picture in his pocket of his 3 children, and that got published far and wide. Finally, his widow up in Portville, New York, was able to identify who Humiston was because she recognized the picture of her children. It's one of those stories that's been widely circulated over the years, shows sort of the tragedy and human face of war. I grew up in a little hometown 6 miles down the road from Amos Humiston's hometown of Portville, New York, so even though many people are familiar with his story, again, I sort of feel a little hometown local pride for Amos and like to relay his story as well. You can find his face and many others here in the monument painted by Dunkelman. So definitely worth a place to come and check out, a quiet spot on the battlefield that tells a key action that you can often have to yourself and give you the opportunity to reflect on those human faces of war. For Emerging Civil War, I'm Chris Mackowski in Gettysburg, here for the 156th anniversary.